she was a social worker before she went to Cambodia. So this was not the first time she'd sort of entered into this world. And that's kind of where I want to start with you, really, just to get a sense of, I guess, what your framework was like before you went to Cambodia. And I guess the first question is, what drew you to social work in the first place?
Actually was a photographer for 8 years and ran a photography business in Melbourne, and that's what I was doing. And I moved to London and Spain to work as a photographer, so that was my life. Whilst I was doing that in London, I decided I didn't like it anymore. I lost the passion for it, and I was living in Brixton as a photographer, but really, really unhappy. So my sister happened to come and visit London, and we sat on the floor of her hotel room looking at, well, what do you like? What are you good at? Where do you want to go? And my main thing was I wanted to help people, I wanted to work with people, I wanted to teach people, but I didn't want to be a teacher. I was very rebellious by nature. For anyone that knows me, I am completely rebellious by nature, so the idea of having to be anywhere at any particular time was never going to work for me. So a teacher in a school was never an option. And so whilst I was in London, I said to my sister, I will apply for university back in Melbourne, and if I get in, and I was looking at social work, psychology, things like that, if I get in, I'll come back to Australia. And I got in, so I went back to Australia and was having a moment of weird confidence, and I rang each university and said, why should I choose you?
Sounds like a classic Romi story, right?
Yeah, exactly. And every university was different. What Melbourne said and what Monash said and La Trobe, they all offered quite different things. And I went with Monash because they seemed the most open-minded. So I then went and studied social work and loved it, like from day one. And I was 30 and I absolutely loved it. And I knew that's exactly where I needed to be, and I was in the right place. And also it was a postgrad, so all of us were 30. So yeah, it was amazing.
This question is going to make more sense when we talk about Cambodia. When you were taught social work, when you were trained as a social worker, what are the kind of parameters for the kinds of relationships you're supposed to have with your clients? What were you told in Australia? What are the no-go zones?
Well, that you don't become friends with your clients, and that you have boundaries. And I am a believer in boundaries, but I think I recognise boundaries differently, and maybe I define them differently to how I was taught in Australia, which was, it felt very stiff. It's like, I'm the counsellor, you're the client, and there's a huge wall between us. So you tell me all of your deep, dark secrets, and I will just sit here and nod. And that just felt really, really wrong. I'm like, I can't do that. And I never did. So, yeah.
I'm going to jump straight in and go to Cambodia. Before we talk about the work you did with them, give us a sense of Tiny Toones, this organisation. When was it set up and by whom?
So KK is the founder. That's his nickname. His real name is Toysabil. And KK is the founder, and he set it up probably 2 to 3 years before I arrived.
And what year did you arrive?
2010. So it was very unintentional. It wasn't like there was this guy who decided he wanted to open an NGO. He was a Cambodian American deportee, which means he was born in Cambodia but technically born in a Thai refugee camp on the border during the Khmer Rouge. And at 2 years old, he went to America. So the whole deportee story is super fascinating, but in a nutshell, America opened its borders during the Khmer Rouge and allowed a bunch of people from the refugee camps to go to America, but in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, didn't really take care of them. So you had a whole lot of Cambodians without passports, without anything, arriving in America and then kind of dumped. And so a lot of them did end up in gangs, in prisons. They all went to school, but they never had things like passports and green cards because they didn't know that they existed. So KK and a lot of my friends in Cambodia have a similar story where he went to school, he was teased for being poor, he was teased for looking different. He was already a breakdancer as a teenager, but then at some point, the gangs were the people that looked after you. So he ended up in a gang, and there was, I love his stories about the gang warfare between, Hispanics and Asians and whites and blacks, and there's a big gang warfare in California. And so he was in that world and eventually ended up in prison. Fast forward a few years, and one of the repercussions of 9/11 was that all aliens that had committed a crime, even if they paid their time, were immediately to be deported back to where they came from. And he didn't really come from anywhere, but they deported him to Cambodia, of which he knew nothing about it, didn't know the language, didn't know anything. And a lot of my friends are actually part of the deportee community. So how he ended up finding the organisation, that was just a sidetrack into what are deportees.
You can have a whole book on him alone. That whole story is extraordinary. This tiny window where the US allowed these people in a kind of a humanitarian way, supplied them with no paperwork, and literally knocked on his door at 4 a.m. when he had a child and a partner, and picked him up and put him on a plane and sent him to Cambodia, where he spoke not a word. Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Yeah, and that story is in the book because I think it's fascinating. And I always actually thought that my next job would be working with deportees and settling them into Cambodia and actually teaching them Khmer myself. So anyway, so when he did end up back in Cambodia as a sort of 27-year-old single man, he left his partner and his child that he never saw again back in California. And his first child now is probably 20, 21. And he still speaks to him on the phone. But anyway, so when he came, he started going into the dumps and, looking for lost children that were struggling and wanting to help them. So word got out that there was this, kind sort of Cambodian American breakdancer in the streets, and he had full tattoos. He looked like a gangster. He looked like a hip hop dude. He attracted the underworld of the slums, and the kids were really drawn to him, and they started begging him, please, bong, teach us to breakdance. And he said no for a long time. He didn't feel he had anything to offer them, and then eventually he gave in, and it started with about 6 or 8 kids in his 1-bedroom apartment, and it started from there. And he remembers these little kids sitting in front of his TV and watching Looney Tunes. So Tiny Toons actually sort of was born out of that. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And so when I was brought in, it was like, we have 200 kids doing hip hop at a centre with no infrastructure and just a big fat amazing mess. Can you do something? I was like, oh, holy shit.
Tell us about the day-to-day at Tiny Toons. So kids are coming in to breakdance, but also to learn hip hop, but kids are also, they're sleeping there. And there's kind of an education component as well. Can you walk us through like a normal day at Tiny Toons when you started?
An actual normal day, or what a normal day should have been?
Pick a random day that gives us a sense of, because it's a really interesting part of the book as well about what actually went on at Tiny Toons. And then the whole book is kind of about what Romi was involved in, kind of either formalising or organising or changing or tightening up, never losing the ethos of it, but just to give us a sense of how it ran.
Yeah, so I mean, in Australia I would call it a drop-in centre, but that terminology doesn't exist in Cambodia. But a drop-in centre is in, we were open from like 8 a.m. till probably 7, 8 p.m. And during the day we would have 2 different sets of kids come in. You came in morning or afternoon, and that's the normal school system, is it's morning or afternoon. So they would come in from 4 years old to about 25 years old. They would come in, they would learn hip-hop, breakdance, as in the dance studio. Also in the music studio, they would learn rapping, emceeing, lyric writing, DJing, graffiti, painting. And then once we'd sort of got their confidence and got them in the door and felt safe that they were in the door, then we would do education in terms of Khmer language, English language, math and computer. And then we'd have an outreach program of health, hygiene, HIV, drug and sex education. And we would do that in the villages and in the centre. So the volunteer girls, the young Khmer girls, they would run all of that stuff, the HIV, the health, all of that education. Interestingly, the girls were always volunteers, the boys were always paid, so that's just an interesting thing to note. And then all of my staff were former street kids, so we never hired outside. We always moved kids up, so the kids that were doing well and that were, say, staying clean and being responsible, they would then move up to become mentors and then staff themselves, and then they would end up having a job and they would teach the next generation. So it was always street kids teaching street kids. So a normal day should have looked like that. There were many, many days. And then at about 4 p.m. when all the kids went home was when the teenagers came and breakdanced with KK. And that's what everybody waited for, to come and watch. Even if you didn't breakdance, everyone just stood there and watched. And it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. It was like a bunch of kids just breakdancing together, and you could feel that. That was when everyone becomes family, becomes friends, and through that feeling of trust and friendship and respect is where they find the confidence to want to learn English and Khmer and math. So a normal day should look like that. Every now and then, I think even in the book, there would be a day where I get to 7 p.m. and I opened my to-do list for the first time. So I ran on chaos a lot, and sometimes it was just one kind of crazy situation after another, and then it would get to the end of the day and I hadn't done anything. So yeah, that happened a lot too.
How did hip hop as a dance style sit alongside kind of traditional Cambodian styles of dance or movement? I guess I'm wondering what was so alluring to these young people about the culture of hip hop?
Yeah, it's interesting because back then, so sort of 2008, 2010, breakdance and hip hop was considered anti-Khmer, mostly by the government and by the people in the ministry. So we were evicted 3 times in 2.5 years, and we were constantly evicted because we were hip hop, and hip hop was considered anti-Khmer because they look at TV and they think we're breeding gangsters and, making crime and all of that, which is interesting because actually what we were trying to do was the complete opposite, was get them off the street. It took many, many years to kind of be accepted, and then we would perform on stage, and we sort of were, but other areas of Asia accepted hip-hop way before Cambodia did. We were the only hip-hop centre back then. Now there are a lot of kids doing hip-hop and breakdance, and also they see things like, I'm showing my age, Justin Timberlake or whatever, and you see kids or young people doing hip-hop dancing behind them. And I used to always watch and think, oh, my kids could do that. My kids could be, I always wanted them to be on So You Think You Can Dance with Mia Michaels. So that was always my dream. Like, these kids would win hands down. Because I would always say street kids that hip-hopped, and even my expat friends would say to me, you have to stop saying that, they're just dancers now, because they're so good.
You've talked a little bit about KK, who's the founder, and we meet a lot of young people in this story, and Romi writes about these people so beautifully, and also she writes about the dancing so beautifully. You get this really clear sense of the energy in the room and what would happen when you've got this beautiful line where you're like, when you're with a friend, you could finish each other's sentences, but these kids knew each other so well that one started a move, the other one could finish that dance move in real time. Tell us about some of the other people that you met. I mean, talk to us about, it's an intense name. His name was Suicide.
Yes.
Tell us about Suicide.
Yeah, so when I first met Suicide, and his name is a bit jarring, and then I was told, so all of them were named by KK. Okay. It was kind of like being christened by KK, the big boss. And so Suicide was given that name for his killer moves. His dancing is like something you've never seen. It's just wild. It's unbelievable. It's so unpredictable. It's incredible. So there's Suicide, who is actually going to France in October because he won a breakdance competition run by the French Institute in Phnom Penh a few weeks ago, and him and another guy will be going to France in October to breakdance with some others. So some of them are still really breakdancing at a high level. Slick is another one for his slick moves. Slick is also winning lots of competitions. He also judges a lot of breakdancing competitions. He's now with his partner. They have a baby. These guys are all now close to 30, which is wild to me because I met them as teenagers. So Big Girl Diamond. So Diamond was the first and only breakdancing female in Cambodia. So so they're all big boys and big girls. So Big Girl Diamond. And again, Diamond for her rare and precious dance skills, so like a diamond. So KK named everyone based on their dance moves or based on some quality that they have.
You're very clear in the book that there's a kind of even though they're all strangers to each other, there's a kind of a community amongst them. And I wondered if you could share with us about what the only word I can think of is codes. It's not values. What are the codes of the people who became part of that community? What are the things they had to do in order to stay part of that family?
I think it's a real camaraderie. It's a real almost, I was going to say brothership. It very much was a boys' club, especially for the first few years. And then it becomes a bit more of a sort of, includes women also. But very much a boys' club. And a lot of it is very much about respect, really. So when you join the dance floor, if you've ever seen any movie that has breakdancing in it, there'll always be a circle, and within that circle, everyone's kind of bopping together to the beat, and then one person will go in the middle, and everyone sort of supports that one person. And it doesn't matter what they do in the middle, they will get that support. And that, I think, is where they find that friendship and that brotherhood is on the dance floor, and so it's very much a respect between each other. The only rules that we had at the actual centre was no violence, no taking drugs, and no dealing drugs. They were pretty much the only rules. Surprisingly hard to keep some of them, but they did keep to that. There was, even though a lot of them had so many issues, there was an underlying respect that existed. Like if a kid came in high, I would literally just give them a look, and you would see they would go to, rebut, and then they would look at me and they would just lower their head, walk out the door, come back 3 days later. They just knew that it wasn't okay because they were the mentors of the younger kids, and it wasn't okay to not teach them fairly.
There's a scene, a powerful little vignette in the story where there's been a kind of a knife fight between two kids. There are a lot of kids who have a lot of issues. They either had drug dependency, or they had parents who were very violent, or they had a lot of self-regulation issues. And one kid took a knife to another kid who didn't retaliate. And KK comes in and says, "Put the knife on me." Putting the knife on him is the same as putting the knife on me, so put the knife on me. It's a really interesting expression of how tight they are. It's a real family unit. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, in the book as well, you give us all these different kids from all over Cambodia, really all over Phnom Penh. And some of them came from families that were middle class. There's one story of a child whose parents had all their money in the house and a fire through the house, and they lost everything. And they went from being kind of middle class and okay to not being okay anymore. But the stories of different kids gave us these very different and diverse expressions of how people live in Cambodia, of how these kids live. Could you tell us just a couple of the examples to give us a picture of what life in Cambodia was like for people in their kind of class, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, all the kids that are at Tiny Toones would be considered low class, and that's how they ended up at the centre. But they, like you say, they all came for different reasons. Some came from the streets because of gang life, some came with drug and alcohol addiction, some came with family breakdown, some came from single parent household, which is not the same as here. Single parent household here is hard, but it's not like in Cambodia where there's no Centrelink, there's no government assistance. There's, your children then leave school to go and work because that's how you put food on the table. So it's very different. There's no backup plans. And I think because of the Khmer Rouge, because they all lost so much family, they all had to very much rely on themselves, and there wasn't anywhere else to go. So, and I really noticed that when I first arrived, coming from working in Australia, and I was working in Melbourne, I had Centrelink, I had backup plans, I could get any single person a bed, food and clothes tonight with no notice because I was hooked into the community.
What kind of social capital is what you're describing?
Yeah, and in Cambodia that was the first thing I noticed was when they were hungry, they were hungry. When they didn't have clothes, they didn't have clothes. When there was no backup plan. So that was really tough for me because I felt solely responsible for 200 kids and all my staff at any given time.
It's amazing to hear Romi talk about it in this way, because when you arrived, you had no Cambodian.
No.
So I want to ask you about the barriers for you in working with these young people at Tiny Toones. So, you write about the barriers of culture and you write about the barriers of language. How did you go at learning Cambodian quickly and learning the kind of dialect you needed to in order to sit with them, talk to them and understand what they were living?
I took learning Khmer very, very seriously. I went through Australian Volunteer International, and we have 1 month induction program where we learn the language, the culture, the nuance, how to get an apartment. 1 month, yeah. So it's the intro to all of it. And so that was helpful. But then, of course, I get to work and no one understands me. I don't know enough language. I can't really do anything. So I went and got myself a private tutor, and I went to class at sort of 7 a.m. every morning before work. One, so I could learn the language, but also that I would start my day in Khmer so that when I got to work, my brain was kind of in that language. And then at first they would all either laugh at me or I was just kind of not getting the nuance of the language, because you can learn the words and they say it's not tonal. It is, but it's not. So, but it's not that it's tonal, it's that you speak from a different part of your mouth, throat, tongue. And if you don't get that right, which changes the sound, they just look at you blankly. So you're not only learning the words and the vowel system, but also how to speak from your throat. It took me a really long time, but when the kids could see that every single day I kept trying and trying and trying, and I would not let them speak to me in English, eventually you start learning. And when you get to the point where you're joking or they're joking and you laugh and they're like, oh, we got to be careful, she understands us now. And that's when you know that you're getting somewhere. And also for me, with guys like Slick and Suicide and these guys that were so traumatized, have come from so much baggage and so much violence, and the only reason I couldn't do counselling with them was because I didn't speak their language. I really made it my business to learn their language so that I could do counselling with all of these guys.
I mean, early in the book, in the introduction, Romi says, this is not a white saviour story. This is not about someone from one culture lifting up people from another culture. But I wanted to ask you what you worked out while you were there with them about what helping looked like. Like you and KK, you write in the book that you and KK had a policy of no handouts. You didn't just give people, you didn't throw money at people to help with anything or even give them money, even if they were hungry. Can you talk a bit about how you worked out what helping looked like? You say in the book that you had your voice in your head and you had your father's voice in your head.
My dad was always very into education is the answer. And if you can get someone an education, then you can help change their life. And I agreed, except education also means money, and I didn't believe in handouts. And I've lived in a lot of places around Asia, and I never believe in the concept of handouts because it doesn't help. It helps for a minute. I can give you $5 and now you have $5, but then what? So it doesn't do anything in the long term. So, and KK, thank God, had the same sort of thought. And so at our centre, we never ever gave handouts. So it didn't matter what the situation was. Every kid knew that they didn't get handouts and no one ever asked for one. Yeah. So even if they needed medicine, they would ask for a loan and we would work it out. If they were hungry, we would work it out. We would give them, even if it was a fake job, we would give them something to do that earned them $5 so that they weren't being given $5. So it was very important that everybody earned their way, and especially from the teens up, we always made sure that everybody felt that they were earning their keep and no one was being given anything for free.
The book is a really nuanced look at Cambodian culture with a lot of honesty, where you're like, I'm looking at it through my eyes. I can't pretend to understand it from their perspective. But I wondered if you could talk about what your impressions were of Cambodian culture when you first got there, in particular the differences between what boys and girls are allowed to do and how men and women are viewed.
Like I said, I've been to a lot of Asia, and Cambodia felt different. When I landed, I thought that I would be fine. And very quickly I realised I would probably not be fine, and I had a lot to learn. The girls all the way through were always considered volunteers and they were never paid. The boys were always considered staff and they were always paid. And there was quite a separation between the boys and the girls. And for some reason it was easier to connect with the boys, maybe because of KK, because of breakdancing, whereas the girls spoke not a word of English, like not one word. And I didn't really understand all their cultural nuances. You know, they would play with my hair and then I'm like, okay, I think this is a step in the right direction. If they would braid my hair, and then they started bringing in a hairbrush to brush my hair, and I'm like, okay, this is good. But and there's a story of one of the girls, W, where she would sniff the back of my neck, and I didn't know what that meant for a really long time. And I remember when she first did it, I'm like, do I smell? You know, why is she sniffing me? And then Diamond sniffed me. I'm like, what is going on? And it's kind of a term of endearment, the way I might give you a peck on the cheek. They give you a sniff on your neck or a sniff on your cheek. They do that with babies also. They go, and they sniff babies. So, and not everyone, but that was really, really common with the guys that I was working with, that we would sniff each other. I never could bring myself to do it back because it felt really weird. But I was sniffed a lot. And when it would happen, I'm like, okay, this is good. This is me being accepted. But there's a lot of things that you learn as you go, and often you learn by making mistakes. You know, I remember once being upstairs in one of the centres, and I don't think this is even in the book, but it just came to mind. But so what had happened was my legs were near the top of the stairs, and in Cambodian culture you don't step over someone's legs. And there's a lot of superstitions, so you've got to learn the superstitions really, really quickly. And because they wouldn't step over my legs, everybody wanted to either go to the toilet or go for lunch, and nobody would step over my legs. Wow. And because I was white-skinned and the boss, you don't tell me what to do. So everyone just stood around. And I felt terrible when I worked it out. Like, why didn't someone just kick my legs out the way? No. You don't. And that's a real status thing. You know, I was the boss, so you don't tell me what to do. And they all just sat there.
Yeah. Romi, you described as being called barang, which is a white person, a foreigner. And there's a kind of a hierarchy. So a man trumps a woman. A man is higher status than a woman. But a barang is higher status than a man. There's this interesting hierarchy that it took you a while to kind of work out.
Yeah, I had a lot of arguments with my teachers over this because I couldn't get my head around it. So white skin was high class, but I'm female, I'm low class, but I'm older, I'm high class, and I'm the boss, so I'm higher class. But KK was my boss, but he's got darker skin and he's younger than me, but he's my boss. And I was like, I can't. Because you refer to everybody by their status, never by their name. I was never called Romi, not in 3 years. So I was usually Bong, which just means older, and because that's out of respect, and I was older. At 35, I was the oldest person in the entire centre. The younger, middle-aged ones called me Ming, which is auntie. And then one day I'll never forget a 4-year-old running up to me, jumping into my arms and calling me Yay. I can see you know what Yay means. Grandmother. I was 35 years old. And I was standing with Fresh, one of my boys. I'm like, did he just call me grandmother? And he's like, yeah, Bong, but you know, to her, she's 4, you are grandmother. I'm like, no, never. So, but status is everything. Like even 4-year-olds call you by a status, never by a name. So it's important.
Did you understand, you do refer a lot to the years of the Khmer Rouge, 75 to 79, and the terrible aftermath of that, those years, and what happened afterward. Did you get a sense of whether that hierarchy is from that time or is just a long-standing Cambodian cultural kind of way?
Actually, I have no idea. I don't know what it was like before the Khmer Rouge. I would assume that it's a long-standing thing, only because I've lived in a lot of Asia, and all of Asia has that kind of hierarchy. Even now in Thailand, there's also hierarchy.
How much of your time there, and then I'll come back to Tiny Toones and some of the amazing places they went and things they did, how much of your experience of living inside this culture that's foreign to you was kind of accepting it for what it was, which you did have to do some of the time, and grappling with the ways you wanted to change it?
It was tough to work out which things I wanted to change because of my Western upbringing and because of my education, and which things I wanted to change because they really should be changed because it's actually bad culture. And me and my expat friends would spend a lot of time over beers talking about culture. And we're like, there's good culture, there's bad culture, there's Khmer culture, there's Western culture. Which one is it? And so for me, a simple example was, I remember running a meeting and there was, all of my staff, so maybe 12 young guys in the room, and they would have been 16, 17, 18 years old. And someone's phone rang. And he just answered the phone, didn't even move, just picked up the phone, answered it and started talking. And then someone else. And I just sat there. And my friends, my expat friends were like, yeah, but that's Cambodian culture. I'm like, nah, that's just bad culture. And from then on, I was like, no phones. And everyone looked at me like I was insane. I'm like, absolutely no phones. All phones go on silent or you leave. And so if a phone rang, I did the whole, and I just sat there, and then everyone was like, turn your phone off. She's looking angry. So some things are just bad culture, and some things are Cambodian culture, and you've got to learn the difference between the two, and often through mistakes.
And I really love that part of the book. I love that there's nothing reductive in this book about that it's messy, and you're going to get it wrong some of the times, and you're going to get it right some of the times, and it took you a long time to learn some of these things as well. I want to come back to some of the amazing things that Tiny Toones did, because they didn't just stay in Cambodia, where you were in Phnom Penh. They were invited to travel around. They went overseas. I'm going to ask you about Italy in a moment, but they went to a place called Kampot, which is down south, to run workshops at a place called Epic Arts, which is can you tell us a bit about what Epic Arts does and what your Tiny Toones dancers were there to do at Epic Arts and what that was like?
There was someone in the room from Epic Arts, yeah? Epic Arts, and correct me if I'm wrong, the main thing I remember from it is it's very much works with ability rather than disability, and they had a lot of deaf students, but they had lots of different disabilities, and I remember Down syndrome kids, deaf students, hard of hearing students. The manager was a fantastic, very bubbly, laughing woman in a wheelchair. So they really accepted people from all different disabilities, and they all worked together in a really incredibly beautiful way, like nothing I'd seen in Australia or anywhere else.
And your students were invited there to run workshops for people in hip hop who were deaf. How did they do that?
Yeah, it was crazy. So the manager at the time, or I'm not sure if her position was manager, but Hannah, who ran that at one space, she invited KK to come down and run some breakdancing classes. Now, KK, one, hates travelling. He also is not a fan of small towns, so he will always find an excuse to get out of it. Luckily for him, at the time, his wife was pregnant, so he had a good excuse. And he called me white girl, so he was like, white girl, you go. And I'm like, well, I can't teach breakdance. What do you want me to do? So we chose two of our teachers to go with me, and I would sort of supervise them. And we chose suicide because he had just got himself into a whole lot of trouble, and he was cut from the Singapore team and didn't go with the boys to Singapore. So this was him having a second chance by coming to Kampot. And we chose Hoyt, which was an interesting choice because he was like a 15-year-old, very shy, introverted. I don't think he'd ever said a word to me or anyone else. Super, super quiet, beautiful, beautiful young boy. And we chose him as a way of giving him a chance to step up and hoping that the two of them could work it out and that I would sort of just manage it and make sure that everything went okay.
It's one of the most beautiful stories in the book. I don't want to ruin it for anyone. The other thing that you describe is going to, they went to Singapore, but also going to Italy. And it's a testament to the way that Romi writes about it as well, to see how this culture of hip-hop stretches across other cultures and across language. So initially they were invited to be part of this amazing thing called We Free Day, which I'll get you to talk about. And there were other people there from Uganda, from Portugal, from the UK, and this year and the year that you guys weren't also invited, from Cambodia. What does We Free Day stand for, and who did you meet there? Who did you take, and what was it like for the students to be there?
Okay, so We Free is We Are Free of Drugs, and it's a celebration that they do every year to be free of drugs. And it's in San Padriano at a drug rehabilitation community. So not a centre, a community, and I mean an enormous...
Like a whole town.
Yeah, like a huge town.
It's on the coast, isn't it? It's near Rumini.
So from Rumini you go up into the mountains, and it's got like vineyards, and it's got studios and art rooms, and it's just the most unbelievable thing. And so every year they celebrate being free of drugs and invite family and friends and different people to come and celebrate. Some of them have been there for a few months, some of them have been there for many years, and it's also a mentoring program where the ones that have been there for longer mentor the ones that have been there for shorter. So we were invited because that year they were inviting NGOs from around the world that used breakdance and hip-hop to help teenagers get clean off drugs. So we were, I don't know how they found us, but they did. And and as always, whenever they invite, say, just me or just KK, I'm like, oh yeah, and our kids. So we took 4 kids, and KK and I, and the 6 of us went, and it was incredible. It was one of the first times that I'd really, really witnessed the power of dance. Like, I knew about it, it made sense to me, but to see a group of breakdancers with no language in common other than hip-hop communicating was absolutely unbelievable, because they couldn't speak the language. They'd never met people from different cultures and different countries, but hip-hop was the language, and that was really, really special.
You also detail watching how all these other students from around the world responded to your students. And at one point, Romi actually goes up to another group of breakdancers, and she's like, what do you love about these guys? Like, explain it to me. And they were so embracing of the people you worked with, that you were there with.
Yeah, and I think because my kids were probably the youngest out of all of them that were there. I mean, we took one of the boys, Frog, who was like 16, and a couple other 17, 18-year-olds, but everyone else that was there from around the world was well into their 20s. And they really took the kids in. And yeah, I went up to some of the Italian girls. I'm like, you guys don't speak the same language. How are you so in love? How are you so supportive? How does this make sense to you? And they were just like, we see ourselves in him. We can see it in his face. And their advice was just love him. Love him when he's good, love him when he's bad. And that was really the bottom line of the whole time we were there, was to just love him when he's bad also, rather than be that person that puts judgment and puts restrictions on their love.
There's a lot of emotion in this book. Romi describes these periods of kind of howling with sorrow, and then flipping almost straight from that into peals of laughter. Like, it's almost kind of manic.
I was.
And I wanted to ask you whether you'd experienced that before, because you detail a couple of moments that are really intense, with where kids go missing, or they come in high, or they're all kind of lying, or there's a knife fight, or you think you might have to move on, or you get evicted again, or other things as well, just being overwhelmed. I'm wondering if being in Cambodia kind of broke something open in you.
I don't think I had time at the time to deal with it. I would usually discover or deal with it if I got a break at some point. At the time, it was just chaos upon chaos, and you just kept going because you didn't have a choice. So I didn't ever stop and think about my own, say, mental health or my own emotional health. I was just sleeping with my phone in my hand because something could happen at any given time, and something usually did. So I just kept going and going and going, and sort of dealt with all the, anxiety and PTSD and trauma, a few years later.
And that's what we're here for tonight.
This is an intervention.
Exactly. Royalty, it's a safe space. You also, and I'm going to move on after this, but you also brought many of the dancers to Melbourne a couple of years ago. What did they expect of Australia? How did they find Australia, and how did people receive them here?
Yeah, it was incredible. There was a group of 13 of us, and they were all dancers and some singers and music, producers, and they were all my kids. But we decided we were going to come to Melbourne, and they choreographed a 90-minute dance piece, and the idea was that they were going to tell their life story through dance without language to an audience that don't speak Khmer. So, and we did invite actually the entire Cambodian community of Melbourne, so they did come to one of the nights. But otherwise it was done through dance because that was the only language that they had. So they choreographed it themselves, and that was absolutely beautiful, and it started from before the Khmer Rouge all the way through to today when they did it. And even in the play, some people died, some people found Tiny Toones, some people found families, some people fell in love. So everything that they lived happened on the stage, and the way we were received was unbelievable. The questions that they had before we came were ridiculous. Like, all they wanted to know was, can we bring rice? Can we bring noodles? Where are we going to sleep? And that was all they wanted.
Kangaroos. They wanted to see kangaroos.
They wanted to see kangaroos, but it was a lot about rice and noodles. I think they were worried about, we don't have money. How are we going to do this in Australia? And it didn't matter how many times I'm like, I will look after you. You guys will be fine. So we made a deal. By the time we got to KL airport and they were driving me completely insane, I made a deal with them. If you want to ask me any question about anything, do it with chocolate or coffee in your hand and I will answer. And it was the cutest thing. All 13 of them put all of their few cents together and delivered a cup of coffee to me. And then like, can we ask you questions? Can we see a kangaroo? What about rice? Then they all went back to that again.
But back onto rice, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. In an early section of the book, you talk about the interview you did to be accepted to go and work for Tiny Toones, and you said that one thing you didn't mention in the identity in the interview was a sense of kind of connection you felt with these kids, even with the idea of these kids, because they were second generation survivors. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I just sort of hoped that, they call the Khmer Rouge the Holocaust of Asia, and my grandparents are coming out of the Holocaust, so I sort of was like, could there be some way that I can understand where these kids are coming from? They'll be first generation out and I'd be second generation out, but maybe that will make some sense. And maybe, in the end, I'm not sure if it actually did, but I kind of hoped that somehow there would be a comfort. But weirdly enough, I never got to express it to them because they didn't understand any of that at all. And if I ever tried, their understanding of anything outside of Cambodia and outside of their hardships is not, their understanding is not very high because their daily existence is a struggle. So listening to someone else's troubles is not something that they do very often.
Having now also written the book, and I want to ask you in a moment about its reception, what do you understand about your fuel for wanting to do this work? Where does it come from for you?
I don't know where it comes from. I've done a few stints, like I did 6 months in India with the World Health Organization, working in the outcast colonies, the Harijan colonies, around rates of suicide and depression. I worked in Vietnam, working with street kids and working with disability. And every time I come back to Australia, something was always wrong. Something was always missing. It never felt enough. I felt that we were quite privileged and we could do more. So there was always a drive to do more, and it didn't matter how much work I did in Australia, it never filled that hole. And also that sense of community. I really love community development style work where you're actually helping a community build rather than helping one person survive. I really like the idea of community.
And you said to me before we met tonight as well that any kind of injustice makes your blood boil.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. It's not always that helpful. But but injustices make me crazy. I feel like there's always something that we can do, and I was going to say as a society, as a world, we're very problem focused, and I always wonder where are the solution focused people. And if we're all focusing on the problem, then how do we find solutions? You know, even when I'm in Australia now and I'm only here for a few weeks and I watch the Australian news back in Thailand where I live now, very problem focused. I'm like, you have been saying the same thing on the news every single day for months. Is no one trying to think of something different? So, and just the idea that I can't make a difference because who am I, or I'm just one person. But even in this room, if the of us that are in this room all vowed to do one thing, we would make a big difference. So sitting around doing nothing for me is not okay.
You're also honest in this book, and there are a lot of people who live amazing lives and think, I'm going to write a book about it, but they shouldn't all be books. But this one is a really great book, and I wanted to ask you about you're honest in the beginning that different editors worked with you on it and that it had different iterations, it was different things along the way. Can you talk about how it changed and the decision to make it a kind of a memoir, to put yourself in it as that through line?
Yeah, when I first sort of decided to write the book, it wasn't really a decision at the beginning. It was a lot of people telling me that I should write a book. And I kept thinking, exactly like you said, well, we're all living in Cambodia. Why is my story any more interesting than my housemates, for example? But a lot of people were saying to me that because I spoke the language so well and I was so embedded in the culture and the people, and I went to every birth, death, funeral, festival, I was, in the middle of it, that the experience that I was having was really quite unique, and a lot of expats don't experience that depth of experience. So that sort of made me think about it. And then also the first sort of go at it was really to help other people that were either studying international development or community development to have a taste of what the reality is when you get on the ground. Because I felt, even though I'd studied it, when I landed I didn't feel prepared for it. So I think it started as a bit of a guidebook. I thought it would be like further reading at a university, that kind of thing. And then I went to a writer's retreat in Byron, I think. Jan, you were at that one, weren't you? Went to Byron Bay Writers Festival a million years ago, and at one of the workshops, I remember I think it was Laurel, and she was saying to me, what's the red? They talk about the thread. I was going to say red thread. That's just because in my mind it's red. But the thread of the story. So there's always going to be a thread, and that thread is the one thing in the book that has to stay. If you take that one thing out, everything falls down. And I kept saying Cambodia, Tiny Toones, KK, and I kept trying to work out what's the thread that she keeps talking about. And I remember she just came over and whispered, and she says, when you're willing to admit that it's you, then we'll talk. I was like, oh no, I'm not writing a book about me. No, that's a terrible idea. So it took me a long time to get my head around it, but then she really did convince me that I could give a voice to kids that can't give a voice to themselves, and I can actually not tell their story, but tell my story that includes all of them. So all of my kids who are in the story are all fully aware of everything that I've written. All their photos have, permission from all of them. They still ring me every day going, oh, Mum, I saw you on TV, So they're really still very much a part of it. But it took me a while to accept that it was in a way about me, and once I got over that, then I was able to write, and then I just wrote, and I wrote for years and years and years and years. And it was just therapy. It was just years and years of therapy. And there was even one chapter that I wrote probably 5 years after I'd almost finished the book. I just could not. Every time I pick up my laptop and the tears, and then I couldn't see the computer, and I'm like, oh God, here we go again. So every day I tried for years to write that chapter, and I just couldn't. So some chapters took a lot longer, and then in the end it all sort of came together, and I worked, like you said, with different editors for different purposes. Every editor that you work with has a different purpose, whether it's to mould the story, whether it's to work with the pace, whether it's to fine tune. So every editor, we had sort of a different vibe, which I really liked. I had editors in New York and then in Australia. And and finally wrote those stories that I couldn't write. And even now, I did the audiobook a few months ago, which was the best fun. As you can see, I like talking, so the audiobook was, oh my God, put me in a studio and I had the best time. But even still, when I hit certain chapters, I just cried. And I left most of my crying and laughter in the audio, except for that one chapter that I couldn't write. I actually needed to stop recording and just sit on the floor and cry for a while.
Amazing. Your writing in this book takes us really to the heart of a whole lot of experiences of living close to these people, of knowing that you're separate from them and different from them. As Miriam mentioned at the beginning, you live in Thailand now and you're a counsellor. And I wondered how all of these experiences have changed, both how you are with clients, but kind of how you run all the relationships in your life, how you live your life, how have they kind of worked on you?
Well, so in Thailand now, my counselling is mostly in person, sometimes online, and I work with couples counselling, adults and teenagers. And I suppose it's the whole boundary thing. Like, I share stories also. If we're talking about anxiety or depression, I'll share a time that I felt anxiety or depression. I also think that people really appreciate it because they're like, wow, if the counsellor has felt depression, then maybe I'm not that bad, or maybe we're not so different. Because I think people look at counsellors as there's nothing wrong with them and there's everything wrong with me. So I like to share my own real stories to help sort of bridge that gap and remind everybody that we're all human and we've all felt all of these feelings differently and similarly. And also I tend to work with a lot of NGO workers. I tend to have a lot of burnt out NGO workers that come to me, whether it's online or in person. So I really understand their world. And I think because I've worked with so many different cultures and languages and nationalities, I'm pretty good at picking up the nuance of the culture and the country. And I think that's really important, because what I would say to someone who's, say, born and bred in Asia is not what I would say to someone that was born and bred in Spain. It's an entirely different culture. And if you don't understand the culture, you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
I want to leave time for your questions now. We don't have another microphone, so we'll holler out. We'll put your hand up and holler out. But we'd love to hear from you if you have questions for Romi.
It's a wonderful story. I kept wondering who finances all this, and how does it get financed, and who supports it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, how does it get financed? Like, who finances all of this? How I went was through Australian Volunteer International. So they send me. So I think it's AusAid funded. Is that right? And so they send me, so Tiny Toones doesn't pay, so they get me as a staff member or a volunteer, but AusAid pay, so they paid for my flight, insurance, visa, and then they pay me a stipend, which is enough to eat and pay my rent. And living somewhere like Cambodia, it's enough. They always do it based on what the standard of living is in that country at that time.
But when you took the children overseas, how was that financed?
Depends where. So the question was, when we travelled overseas, how did we finance? And we travelled a lot. For, say, Singapore Youth Olympics, Singapore covered it. For Italy, they covered it. For Australia, there's many chapters dedicated to the Australia tour that started with a philanthropist offering me money, $30,000, to do all of it. So $30,000 to bring them to Australia, to sleep, to eat, to perform, to fly, all of it. And then she actually pulled the funding. And then I was stuck with a half-planned tour and no money. And stubborn as I am, a few breakdowns later, we got on a plane and we went to Australia. But that was, that's many chapters, no? That was hell. That was a lot of breakdowns, and a lot of my expat friends just looking at me saying, you need to stop. It's out of control. You can't do this. So, but I was very determined to do it, because I felt I had been building up all of these kids, including KK, in saying, you are not your past, you are whatever you choose to be. And my injustice stuff was, how dare the Australian Embassy say that we can't come? Who are they to make that decision? Or why does money determine if we're worthy of getting on a plane or not? So I was really worried that if I didn't pull this off, that I was admitting defeat and saying, well, actually, you are your past and you don't deserve this. So I was on a one-way mission to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations, Romi. It's absolutely fantastic that you've published the book and you've got such a fantastic tour happening here. So I hope that continues all around the world, because
Me too.
certainly it's warranted. And all those festivals you'll be able to attend in Asia.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, what's KK doing now? I've met KK and he's just a very gorgeous, sweet guy. I mean, he's the toughest guy you would ever meet in an alleyway at night. He would defend you to the end, you know, but he's the sweetest guy. So how old is he now and what's he doing?
KK is, if you met him in an alley, you would be terrified. He is tattooed head to toe, and I mean full scalp, face, full tattoos, and he's like the scaredy cat, child. KK is still the CEO and founder of Tiny Toones, and Short is the general manager who I trained before I left. So they're still running it. They're struggling financially, both personally and as a centre. They're doing it pretty tough since COVID, because a lot of the funding dried up after COVID, so that's been pretty tough. But they're still managing Tiny Toones and doing the day-to-day. KK is now 47 roughly. So roughly, every time he tells me how old he is, I spin out. I'm like, well, no, you're not. You're like a baby. So, but he's at least mid 40s, because he was only ever a few years younger than me. But his kids are all grown up. Like Unique is 18, and then he's got 2 teenage girls now, and he's still married and got 3 kids and got Tiny Toones. So he's doing well. He's forever the optimist, but they're struggling.
Is it more difficult? Like, things have changed a lot in Phnom Penh, I know, in the last 10, 15 years. So is it more difficult?
Yeah, I think it's more difficult. There's now more of a middle class, which you would think would be helpful, but I think it's more difficult because there's a lot of organisations, as always, that want money. Cambodia doesn't have the greatest reputation of being transparent, so that's always been an issue, even though our organisation has always had a good reputation with that. Generally, when you do grants and things like that, they're usually on 2 or 3 year cycles, and during COVID, most of them ran out. And then people weren't visiting. We'd also have a lot of people come through and then donate that way. So when the funds and the grants run out, and the visitors run out, and also the performances run out, and all of that was COVID related, then you're kind of starting again. And KK is super shy. He's not the guy that's going to ring someone and ask for a handout in any way. So he just kind of sits there and hopes that everything will get better. And then we as the board are like, come on, man. you've got to open your mouth and actually say that you need help.
I thought that was a great part of the book. There's a kind of interesting partnership between Romi and KK, where he couldn't get on the phone and tell everyone about Tiny Toones, but Romi could. Yeah. And people were like, we want to have them, we want to hear the dancing, we want to know about them. And that's how you got TEDx and all these amazing other opportunities that were appropriate to Tiny Toones. They weren't exploitative, but they wouldn't have come maybe also culturally. They're not going to get on the phone and toot their own horn, kind of thing. There was a question in the corner.
Yeah, you talk about the power of dance. What was dance for you when you arrived, and as it evolved through you?
Yeah, a lovely question.
I mean, for me, I always loved dancing just because it was something I did. Should I out all the dancers in the room? I know who you are. Kaz is looking down. Kaz was one of the best dancers at our school when we were in high school. Yeah, a long time ago.
Kaz is on the highest chair in the room as well, yeah.
And Naomi and I had a breakdance battle on stage in Cambodia. So, but dancing for me was always just for fun. It was not anything I took seriously. I've just always enjoyed dancing from young till forever, and even to this day. In terms of the dancing that went on in the centre, I could really, really see the power of it, and you could see it working. Like, as it was working, you could actually witness these kids, shifting something, and that was really incredible. The camaraderie, the respect, the brotherhood. You could really, really see how the dance floor gave them the courage to then take the next step, and it was really clear, and that was very, very beautiful.
Another question? What have you learned about yourself?
I've been asked that. I don't know what I've learned about myself. I suppose that I'm more capable than I thought I was even, And I don't even, it's more that I look around and everyone's like, oh my God, you know, you're on TV, or oh my God, you did a TED Talk. I think when I have a purpose or a goal and I believe in something, then nothing will stop me. And that's kind of good to know within myself. That injustice feeling that I have can be used for good if I allow it to be used for good. But I notice even in my personal life, my boundaries are quite high in my personal life and my boundaries are quite low in my professional life, which is sort of weird and probably not entirely how it should be, but it's the way it is. And I actually notice it within myself. So I'm always trying to remind myself that I've done all these spectacular things and I don't need to be afraid of anything, and I should keep just sort of going on the next hurdle.
There's going to be time to have a drink and eat some cheese, and I'm going to hand back to Miriam. But I wanted to first thank you so much, Romi, for taking us into all these corners of these different worlds that you inhabited, taking us with you and kind of leaving us with the sense that things can change when we pay attention to other people's stories as well. I love that part of it. And I did want to say to everyone who's here, thank you so much for being part of tonight. But I particularly wanted to say to Miriam, this is the first. I think this is going to be a space of like incredible creations are going to happen here in conversation and in storytelling, and it's such a delight that you opened your space that we can all share in it together. Please join me in thanking Romi Grossberg and Miriam Hechtman.
Michaela Kalowski. And Romi, huge mazel. And congratulations. And I know you're going to sign some books. I mean, I do want to ask, what's your next thing?
Sleep. I have no idea this tour is insane. I'm like in a different city every 10 minutes. So I have absolutely no idea.
If people want to stay in touch, do you have somewhere that people can stay in touch with you and follow the journey?
Whether it's on social media or my website has all of my details, which is just my name, romigrossberg.com. But definitely stay in touch. Or I also just wanted to add that with the books, 50% of all the sales do go back to the centre. So I'm donating it all back to the centre. So please share it with your friends and people that I wouldn't have the opportunity to meet, and get them buying and leaving testimonials so that I can keep the centre sustainable.
Great, thank you. All right, everyone, enjoy. Please help yourselves to some food and another drink if you'd like. And Romi will set you up to sign books. Can you buy them?
Yes.
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 Oh, yeah.
The books are for sale.
Decorative and also
Here and online and at all good bookshops.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.